It's the Drum Hang, and I'm Chris Smith. Today we're going to talk about an aspect of Elvin Jones comping that nobody is talking about, that is simple yet extremely challenging. I don't see it talked about anywhere online. I've actually never talked to one of my teachers about it, but it's something I noticed not only Elvin doing, but nearly every great jazz drummer. You can check them out doing it if you listen closely to recordings or if you watch them in person. So before we get into Elvin Jones' snare drum feathering, the album of the day, The Real McCoy, featuring, of course, Elvin Jones. This is a wonderful, wonderful recording. Great McCoy Tyner, Ron Carter, Joe Henderson, and Elvin. It's an all-time, top 10 album for most people. If you haven't checked out a lot of Elvin Jones, this is a great place to start. It is swinging and creative, and really, really one of Elvin's most famous recordings. So, that being said, what in the heck do I mean by Elvin Jones feathering his snare drum? Let's check it out. It's the Drum Hang. So Elvin Jones snare drum feathering is just a term I call for this quarter note pulse that I hear Elvin Jones play a lot on his snare drum, especially during sort of 4/4 straight ahead slower swing songs. All right, and I sort of first became aware of this when I was doing a bunch of Mel Lewis transcriptions. There's a song, You Took Advantage of Me, on a Mel Lewis recording from the 50s. And when I listened really close to transcribe it, I realized I could hear Mel playing quarter notes on his snare drum behind Marty Page's piano solo. At first I thought, no, and then I listened really closely. I was like, definitely, you can hear a quarter note snare drum pulse underneath Mel's ride cymbal. And that was the first time I sort of got tipped off to this feathering, if you, for lack of a better term, feathering quarter notes on the snare drum. So Elvin will do this, like I said, at slower swing tempos. He'll use his bass drum sometimes for a lot of accents while his hands are in unison quarter notes, playing his cymbal beat, sometimes deviating the beat, but always keeping the quarter note pulse in his hand, and then playing the off beats in his bass drum as a way to break up the pattern. So the first example of this is probably the least clear video-wise, but Elvin Jones is playing with the great John McLaughlin on guitar and Joey DeFrancesco and their organ trio, and you can clearly hear, a little better than you can see in this video, but you can hear Elvin Jones playing these quarter notes on his snare drum. Check it out. example of Elvin is great. He's comping, with his own group, he's comping behind the legendary pianist James Williams. So I cut through different parts of this clip. I cut in and out of James' solo and then to Elvin's solo, actually, to where you can see and hear him playing these quarter notes on his snare drum. The part at the end, so I think there's 2 clips of James Williams, and then the part at the end is a clip of Elvin soloing. And you see him, you hear him doing this Elvin stuff, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the solo, he goes, ga, 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 poo, ga. He's playing time, he's playing these quarter notes on his snare drum, and then he unleashes the bass drum, and the crash is on his cymbals as Elvin does. But it's interesting that he goes to it in the middle of the solo. This is a great example of Elvin with James Williams doing 4 quarter notes on the snare drum. Check it out. The next example is Elvin, I think a little later, with his own group again, the Jazz Machine. This time Eric Lewis, E. Lewis playing a piano solo, and Elvin is playing the same idea. You're going to see him playing the quarter notes on the snare drum. You're going to hear how it adds to the pulse and the texture of the time. If he wasn't playing it, we would know it would sound much thinner. It really fills out the sound just like feathering your bass drum. This feathering of the snare drum is incredibly effective. So here's another example of Elvin behind Eric Lewis feathering the snare drum. Check it out. Know that this is not easy. It's not sexy Elvin. It's not, solo Elvin, all these broken triplets and like some of the stuff you hear on the real McCoy. But it's really, really hard to do consistently. It's just like your bass drum. It's hard to play your bass drum, feather your bass drum on quarter notes consistently, at a consistent tempo, at a consistent dynamic level, and then go in and out of comping phrases and back to the quarter notes. The snare drum is no different. You won't just hear Mel Lewis or Kenny Washington or Elvin do this. You'll hear Buddy Rich do this. You'll hear Max Roach do this. You'll hear Kenny Clark do this. Any great jazz drummer, you will find that you will hear them playing quarter notes on their snare drum as a way to add a thickness to their beat, add to the propulsion of the music, and add a thickness to the quarter note pulse. So it's almost every great jazz drummer. So keep your eye out for it, practice it yourself, and you will find how difficult it is to be consistent, but how much of an effect it can have on your pulse and your drive. So this last Elvin Jones is Tommy Flanagan, Richard Davis in a trio setting. And I hope this has been super helpful. So thanks for checking out the Drum Hang, learning with me about feathering on your snare drum, quarter notes, and getting into the great Elvin Jones. So I'll be back soon. Thanks for checking out the Drum Hang. Take it away, Elvin. Feather that snare drum, baby. It's bad. Check it out.